When it comes to current day NBA fans, even current day NBA players, they think their era, their time period, is the best at everything. Case in point with one Anthony Edwards. As Edwards recently said, Michael Jordan's era had no skilled players outside of Jordan himself. Anthony Edwards once again proves you can be a great basketball player, have tons of talent, and still have awful takes regarding your sport. As saying in Jordan's era, he was a quote-unquote only a skilled player, that's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. As looking at the 80s and 90s, tons of skilled players who weren't named Michael Jordan. Of course, Larry Bird, great outside shooter, Magic Johnson, amazing passer, Isaiah Thomas had wicked handles, Dominique Wilkins, a fantastic finisher, and then Kareem for the iconic sky hook. I could go on for days and days and days looking at highly skilled players in the 90s, 80s, even 1970s. But a couple guys I do want to look at, first off, is Grant Hill and Penny Hardaway. As looking at these guys, they could have been two of the best players in league history. When discussing the 90s, kind of get lost in the shuffle forgotten and get highly underrated by current day fans, like Anthony Edwards. As looking at Penny Hardaway, this guy, in his prime before injuries, was absolutely unstoppable and phenomenal player. And being what, 6'7", could handle the ball, could shoot, could dunk on your head. I mean, Penny his day could do anything and everything.
Look at the concentration in Askin's eyes. Hardaway with a jumper.
Hardaway putting the move on Starks. Hardaway with a spectacular maneuver.
Impossible.
And looking past Penny, who once again is phenomenal, you have someone like Grant Hill. And Grant Hill's speed, ball handling, I mean, this guy in his prime, one of the best players to ever lace them up. And unfortunately got hurt, career was derailed, and never reached his full potential. But if he did, would be one of the best players of all time, not even discussion.
That's not good. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Witchcraft.
Guys like Penny Hardaway, Grant Hill, you don't think of them immediately when discussing the 1990s. But anyone who watches film knows basketball wouldn't dare call those players unskilled. And when speaking about skill, who's the most skilled big man of all time? In my view, it's Hakeem Olajuwon and then everyone else. And the dream, what makes him so special? His post moves, his footwork, it transcends time and space. As even guys in the 2020s like Sengun go to this guy for basic fundamentals and training. And back in the 2010s, all the big time superstars, they went to the dream. Guys like Kobe, Dwight, Melo, even LeBron. All those guys sought out Hakeem Olajuwon, who yes, played in the 1990s.
I mean, I've always watched players who've come before me. So, I like, Hakeem Olajuwon taught me a lot about the post-up. Michael Jordan, obviously, I learned a lot from him. A lot of Jerry West. So I watched a lot of different players.
As you guys saw, Kobe right there had an immense respect for the past, guys like West, Hakeem, and Jordan. And even going back further than that, guys like Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor, Kobe was a fan of those guys and studied their games. For the current era of superstars, the current crop of superstars, respecting the past, learning from the past, is definitely a lost art few of them actually do. And when making cross-era comparisons looking at skill, overall talent, things like footwork, shooting, it's always very, very difficult. Because the NBA rulebook, what they call, what they don't call, rules that are enforced, not enforced, they change decade to decade, sometimes even year to year. And looking at the current era, guys like James Harden, the step backs, the travels, the foul baiting things he did, wouldn't be allowed in the 90s, the 2000s, or even the early 2010s. And even someone like Anthony Edwards, who again I like as a player, gets a pretty lenient whistle with his travels, pivots, and up and unders.
Who can go on a heater like Nas Reed, a pick and roll and lob threat. As you see Edwards, I mean, I'm dizzy.
And that's been a strength of Houston's, having a big that can switch.
See what I just thought I saw?
And the crazy thing is, Utah's not going crazy over this travel.
In the past decade of basketball, plays like that, they've really become commonplace in Adam Silver's NBA. But looking back to the 90s, the early 2000s, those plays rarely, if ever, happened. And look, yes, travels, carries, they happen in every era. But in the current era, it is prevalent in every game, basically every possession. Refs back in the 90s, they simply would not allow that. And guys palming the ball, carrying the ball, much more strict in that era. And when that changed, it was the late 90s. Guys like Iverson, Marbury, Francis, even Kobe. Those guys blurred the lines of and one style and NBA basketball. And someone like Iverson early on was very polarizing for carrying the ball and getting away with traveling.
See if you think this is close to a carry. I mean, look at that. Lou Canales is sitting by. What do you got, Lou?
I wanted to add something on Iverson's move. They have called it a number of times here in the league, and that's why the guy's averaging almost 5 turnovers a game.
You can't make that move and not carry the ball.
Watching those plays right there from Iverson in today's league, I mean, it looks pretty tame to the stuff we see nowadays. But back in the late 90s, what Iverson was doing, it was highly controversial. And looking at players pre-Iverson, someone like a Tim Hardaway, Isaiah Thomas, those guys' crossovers, I wouldn't say it was robotic, but it was very fundamental, very quick, and very controlled. Iverson had that long crossover, borderline carrying the ball, that was popularized in the 2000s. Guys like Tim and Isaiah were much more restricted. And that right there is a big point of emphasis. So far in the 2020s, the rules have gotten super lenient. As someone like John Morant on every drive, carries, palms, just does everything you could imagine. And why is that? Because offense scoring, it sells tickets, but fundamentals actually win games and championships. And of course, in this era, what do players actually value? Winning, secondary. Making money, looking cool, getting highlights, your individual brand, that's what matters. And one of the best coaches of all time is, of course, Gino Auriemma. And this guy makes it clear, kids today, players today, their individual ISO skills, their quote-unquote bag, is much better than players 25, 30 years ago. But as actual basketball players, they're not better team guys.
They're more talented than ever. They're better athletes than ever. They can do more things than kids 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. But they're not better basketball players. And they have all these drills, though. They can do that. And they can do all these great things with the ball, one-on-one. The minute you put 4 other players out there and somebody playing defense, they look like they just saw a ghost, right?
So stopping Gino right there, what it comes down to, this era in the 2020s, late 2010s, we value things like having a bag, individual skills, and all these ISO moves. But at the end of the day, it's all flash, no substance. And for this era, once again, that's all that matters for a player, being considered skilled or a highly effective player. And I find a lot of times in discussing a player's skill, all they're talking about is three-point shooting and ball handling. And looking at past eras, again, the era you're in a lot of times determines how effective you can be. For example, someone like Mitch Richmond in the 90s, he was a very good player. But Mitch was way ahead of his time with three-point shooting and long-distance shooting. And if Mitch played today, his overall value of a team will be much, much higher than the 1990s, because his skill set matches the play style of the current era. And for a lot of NBA fans nowadays, the young fans, all they know is three-point shooting in the current era. And if anything differs from that era slightly, they think it's trash, overrated, and not worth their time. But here's the thing, three-point shooting, what's mainly about is overall volume, not percentage, and the player's skill as shooters. And look, off the bat, I'll admit, players nowadays can shoot three-pointers better than players in the past. But with that being said, the increase in percentage is marginal at best. And look in the 1980s decade, the first decade with a three-point shot, players in that era on average shot 28% behind the arc, which of course compared to now is not great. But again, those guys at the avid three-point shot and the pioneers of that shot. Now the 1990s, the non-shortened line seasons, teams 33.6%, which was respectable. The 2000s, again non-shortened line, 35.6%. The 2010s, again 35.6%, and so far from the 2020s, 36.0%. Roughly over a 25-year time period, NBA players, their percentage of shots made from three have increased marginally at best. And of course in the 2000s and 2010s, it stagnated exactly at 35.6%. My overall point being, players shooting the basketball, they've always been great shooters regardless of era. The question is though, are they allowed to shoot threes and encouraged to do so?
And the transition in three is what separated me from anyone else back in the 90s. Where Steph Curry and Clay and James Harden, I say, guys, go watch the tape. I was doing it in the 90s where old school basketball was inside out. And analytics, I was doing in the 90s.
I want to make this very clear once again. What it comes down to era versus era is a shift in play style and overall value. As back in the 90s, what was king? The mid-range jump shot and post scoring. Now in the 2020s, what's king? Three-point shooting. Guys' post-up skills back to basket skills, not great. Their mid-range shooting, also kind of average subpar. But again, for their era, what they value isn't post-up play or mid-range shooting. It's threes. And I'm sure people in the comments are already saying, well, you know, from the 1990s on, evolution took place, humans evolved, and now everyone is superhuman, they're jacked to the gills, and they're all 7 feet tall. Well, first off, human evolution, just on a scientific level, doesn't happen over a 25, 30-year time period, even a century's time period. What actually changes is the technology, resources, and stuff around the athletes, not the athletes themselves. So players now in the 2020s, even 2010s, the advantages they have. Guys in the 60s, they didn't have that. And looking back at those eras, back in the 50s, what were they playing on? Dusty floors, dim gyms, and hooping in Chuck Taylors. The 1960s Bill Russell, sometimes he played 4 straight days in a row, played every single minute. The 1970s, what rims were they playing on? Not breakaway rims, they were unforgiving, and you had to switch the ball to score 2 points. All those eras in varying degrees have tons of obstacles current day players do not have. And if you think the current era is better than the past eras, the 2010s, 2000s, I mean, you're entitled to your opinion, everyone has their opinion. But what I can't stand, won't tolerate, is someone in the 90s to 80s only had one skilled player, that being Jordan. And like Jordan, he was fantastic. But in his era, there were highly skilled players who brought tons to the table. So, as always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.